good evening or afternoon or morning where you are. Um, my name is Joyce Wu. I am the undergraduate convener from Global Development at the School of Social Sciences. Joining me is the amazing Danny Kim, my partner in crime and also tonight's evening's co-host. In this session, you're in Career Anxieties in the Age of COVID, Pathways for a Social Science Student. But before we start though, this is a very important thing, is that I would like to pay my respect and also acknowledgement of country. And so the organizing team would like to acknowledge the Gadigal, Bedigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're hosting this event from, and that the sovereignty of these lands have never been ceded. We'd like to pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging, and also extend our respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are joining us tonight. That this land will always and was and always will be Aboriginal land, and we encourage, please, to include which land you're from, include as well as your pronoun in your Zoom name, but also add that in the chat box if you would like to pay your respect to the custodians, elders of the land. All right, so next slide, please, Madhav. Thank you. So this event is brought to you by the School of Social Sciences and the University of New South Wales Institute for Global Development, IGD, as part of the Mental Health Month hosted by the UNSW Student Health and Wellbeing. The initiative is supported by the Strategy 2025 funding that's dedicated to enhancing UNSW support for students and enhancing student mental health. We recognize that this year and indeed the past year as well have been very challenging for students, staff, and their families and friends, and the broader societies and networks in many, many different ways. And so hopefully our event is just very small and humble way of contributing and supporting students along that journey. Please be sure to check out, there are many, many others wonderful and incredibly useful Mental Health Month events, which are running until the end of October. And a link will be provided somewhere in, oh, there we are. Thank you, Maddie, in the chat box just now. So in terms of the, I'll let Danny introduce this, but just as a quickly before I shut up, just the Zoom etiquette of mute unless you are speaking, and sort of be mindful of differences of opinions, and also if bandwidth permits, if you could leave your video on, that would be wonderful. But if internet connection is not fantastic, we fully understand as well. So over to you, Danny.
Thank you so much to Joyce. Can everybody hear me okay? Amazing. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Danny. I'm a current 4th year in my final term actually at UNSW. So I'm pretty much on the journey with everybody else who may be feeling anxious and a bit uncertain about their career. And I think as social sciences students, we often are in an interesting landscape where we're told that it's hard to get a job or it can be challenging to navigate postgraduate life. And so, to be honest, this event kind of came to be because it was a concern and a thought process that I myself was going through. And as you can see from this very adorable screenshot, this event has been truly instigated by students and for students. So it's so exciting to have everyone here, and it's been largely crafted through many personal conversations and anecdotal accounts of peers, many of which are here tonight. So thank you all for being here. I do have a list of some of my fellow students down the bottom, and this focus group that was held last week really has provided a good context to some of the questions and conversations that we will be going through today. And I just wanted to acknowledge that the main theme of this entire evening, I guess, is ultimately that managing career anxieties is really hard. And it's not just about finding a job, but it's all the different anxieties that really feed into the journey of finding your feet as a student and transitioning into postgraduate life. And of course, I want to acknowledge that we can't possibly cover everything today. This is just one event, but if it plants a new idea in your mind, if it helps you feel just a little bit less alone in going through this very challenging period, like I think that is something to be really proud of and something that I would be so grateful to have been able to facilitate with all of you guys. So just a quick shout out to Madhav, who is doing the behind the scenes tech support. And yeah, let's move on to introducing the three main people for today's event, our speakers. So next slide, please. Okay, so we have three incredible speakers here. So excited to introduce Saul Brady, who is an analyst at Deloitte. We have Emily Morton joining us from Canberra, who is the Standards and Code Lead at ACFID, or the Australian Council for International Development. And finally, we have Juhi Sunreksa, who is the Senior Technical Advisor for Gender and Inclusion in Emergencies at Plan, who an NGO that you may or may not have heard of. But would like to move on to the next section, which I will give each of the speakers to a little bit of time to introduce themselves. And if we can please move on to the next. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Madhav. We have a broad kind of opening topic to complement our speakers' introductions. So Saul, would love to have you first introduce yourself and to speak briefly about these three topic points.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Benny. And hi, everyone. It's lovely to see you all on the call. I guess just a bit of, introduction about myself. So my name's Saul, and I also studied at UNSW. I did a Bachelor of Commerce and Bachelor of Economics degree, and graduated at the beginning of last year, which coincided with the start of the pandemic. I guess, being in your shoes not too long ago, through uni, I wasn't necessarily so certain on what I wanted to study. And it was through, I guess, a lot of the societies and extracurricular activities, and particularly getting involved in 180 Degrees Consulting, which does kind of, student consulting for not-for-profit organizations, that I found a real passion and interest to work in consulting, but also, wanting to work on projects that have purpose and, create positive impact. So I was kind of, drawn to, working, I guess, in the consulting environment, but looking towards going to more social impact consulting and working with government organizations on the really large kind of complex problems that they're facing and trying to solve them. So, throughout my time at uni, I'd kind of, done a summer internship at Deloitte. I really enjoyed the team and the people I worked with. And I was meant to, graduate in 2020 and start there in the middle of 2020. And when kind of COVID hit, there was a lot of, I guess, uncertainty among business. And I was part of, what they called the COVID, graduate cohort, where all of our contracts were pushed back. And, I was delayed by about 9 months from the start date. And so I was stuck in this really, tricky situation. And, I don't have a job at the moment. All my kind of grand plans of graduating kind of gone completely out the window. And I also couldn't travel. So I was thinking, what do I kind of do with my time? And in that moment, you were seeing a lot of businesses, I guess, they were doing kind of mass redundancies. They were letting people go. A lot of leaders had no idea at the beginning of last year what the pandemic would mean for the future of their business. And it was a very, I guess, kind of anxious and uncertain time to be graduating. I myself, was looking around at the business that I had a job at and thinking, is this going to be secure? I haven't even started. It could be so easy for them, like many other, graduates in other positions, just to have your contracts completely wiped. And in that time, I kind of looked for some other opportunities and went across and worked for New South Wales Health, because obviously in the middle of the pandemic, they had a lot of jobs going, and took on a strategy role there for a few months. And the purpose of that was essentially going into that role, not knowing what, say, the next 12 months would be, and knowing that I at least had a secured job to get me through. And then, if things would eventuate with Deloitte, I'd eventually go back over there. And they did end up working out, and I started, the beginning of this year. But I guess to talk about kind of, that kind of highlights my experience of, coming into graduation and finishing uni at the start of 2020, thinking that I had all of my plans laid out and everything was going to go and work out exactly how I wanted it to. But things kind of got turned up on their head, and that was the nature for a lot of graduates in our year, and a lot of programs, businesses were letting people go or pushing back contracts. And so I can see, from your shoes as well, from you guys who are graduating as well, it can be really, really uncertain. The future, you've got lots of things going on in the world around COVID, but also a lot of issues around climate change, global uncertainty, and it does really heighten the anxiety that students do have. But I think, what I found really useful is, going into those situations with a positive approach, looking at, other options, doing a bit of forward planning, and thinking, at the end of the day, it's going to be all right, putting yourself into the perspective of others who, I guess, are probably doing a lot more tougher, during the middle of the pandemic. Now, I guess that, over the last 12 months, or initially at the start of the pandemic, there was a lot of issues around, jobs and uncertainty. But I think, looking now into the future and what we're seeing, what I'm seeing in the business is starting to boom a lot again. And if I look at around, the job market, it's a really, really interesting and weird kind of environment, because we've now got all these businesses that at the start of the pandemic kind of freaked out a little bit. But we need to let people go. We need to reduce our headcounts because we're seeing decreased demand for goods and services. And now it's kind of flipped on the other side. Now that we do have, the light at the end of the tunnel, we have the vaccine. We're getting our populations vaccinated, and the business and economy is opening back up. And there are so many jobs out there now on offer, and a lot of businesses that are now trying to fill so many roles. Domestically in Australia, that's kind of one driver, is the change in mindset of, looking at the pandemic in terms of, I guess, in a negative way, the impact it was going to have, to now seeing it as an opportunity to transform their business, accelerate growth, and looking to bring people on, and particularly graduates and young people on, to help them on that transformation journey. I think it was, really interesting time, COVID. For a lot of businesses, it's really accelerated their growth and transformation agendas, and now they are using it as a vehicle of change to, I guess, transform the way that they do things. And with that, you need people to help you on that journey. So I think, for you guys graduating now or soon, don't be as worried, because I think, what we're seeing in the market is there's that light at the end of the tunnel. There's also a lot of opportunities coming on, because we can't necessarily get labour into the Australian economy, and particularly for people, I look at a firm like where I'm at Deloitte, with a global firm where you would rely on resources internationally to fill in roles. We can't get that either. So we have a lot of jobs open, and a lot of businesses are the same. So I think for you guys, in terms of, it's all about acknowledging, yes, the past year has been quite difficult, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. And it's just about, approaching that with a positive outlook. And in terms of, I guess, going down, finding meaningful work, aligned to your passions and interests, there is, I'm speaking, I guess, from my perspective, I'm lucky to do a lot of work in our social impact consulting practice at Deloitte. I know, being a social services student, you might not necessarily think about going into the world of big business, but there are a lot of businesses out there that do work on important social issues and help kind of large organizations, government, and, NGOs, on their kind of vision and transformation for change. And so I'm really lucky to work in that sector where, we look at big disability providers, we work with, Indigenous groups and services, we tackle issues with government on climate change and reform. So a lot of those kind of big issues and things are important. And, I'm really keen that I've found somewhere where, I guess it's aligned to my interest of working in consulting, but also being able to create positive impact. So I guess to wrap up, that's kind of my take on the job market. And I think for you guys, definitely look at the next 12 months with a bit more, optimism than say what my graduate year had when we were finishing.
Yeah, thanks so much, Saul. A lot to think about there. I think the shift towards the business as usual is probably an also really valuable time for us to reorient and think about what industries we might want to head in as well. And I think you raise a really good point there about how, although you're within, a private business space, you're still working on a lot of meaningful things. And I think that's one thing I've noticed as well through my position right now at an NGO, where it's not just one thing, right? There's so many little things that make up a position and a job. But I guess, some of those anxieties about navigating the job space can come even in times where there seemingly is that availability as well. So looking forward to kind of talking on that topic a little bit more. But just quickly, I actually forgot to ask the icebreaker question, which was if you can quickly talk about your first job and if you'd be able to do that today. That was what I wanted to ask right before we started, but it slipped my mind. But yes.
Yeah, okay. Are we talking like very, very first job?
Yes, I'm talking your first job.
Yeah, okay, great. My very first job, so I was born and raised in a small town of Foster, about 4 hours north of Sydney. And I remember my very first job, it was very young actually. I think it was probably not long after the legal age that you could work, something like 14 or whatever. I got a job working at the local fish and chip shop,
Lovely.
which, in a tourist town, but, come holiday time, in school holidays, we had a lot of work on, a lot of tourists coming in. I can't remember, God, the pay back then, it would have been very low, probably like $12 an hour or something at that age. But yeah, I worked at the fish and chip shop, which was, good learning experience of working in a team. Also, working in that kind of, I guess, hospitality, probably something I wouldn't want to do in the future, but it was a good learning experience at a young age nonetheless.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thanks so much for answering that. We'll move on to Emily now. Please, if you could introduce yourself and just speak on these topics briefly. And also if you could talk about your first job and if you would be able to do your first job now.
Sure, thanks, Danny. Well, I'll start with that then. So my first job, I think I was just trying to recall, but I think it was in a childcare centre. I'd sort of trudge up there after school and go and look after some little kids for a few hours and then come home. So difficult sector to work in. So kudos to everyone who does these days. But so lovely to meet you all. As Danny said, my name's Emily Morton. And I am currently working at ACFID. So ACFID is the Australian Council for International Development. So we're the peak body or membership association for Australian NGOs that work overseas. So we play a lot of different roles, I guess, in the international aid and development sector. But we do a lot of work with our member organisations around advocacy to government on issues related to aid and development. We also do a lot of work across the sector in terms of standard setting. So my particular role is working on something called the ACFID Code of Conduct. So this is, I guess, a sector-wide set of standards that Australian NGOs can choose to sign up to if they would like to become a member of ACFID. And it sort of sets out good practice for NGOs working overseas. So we, I guess, have quite a big membership, and in kind of reflecting on my own sort of journey here and what I'd like to kind of talk to you about and hear from you today as well is, I guess, very much focused on the NGO side of working in the development space. And it's great to have Saul here and to have some different perspectives as well. So there's lots of different actors that make up all the amazing work that goes on to contribute to sort of development globally. So it's always fantastic to get a sense of who all the different players are. And I guess for me, I initially studied education and worked as a teacher for quite a long time. and then went back to uni and studied Master of Applied Anthropology and Development down here in ANU. And so for me, that was really a decision that came out of doing some volunteering overseas, and also just always being interested in sort of contributing, I guess, back more globally to some of the big issues that are affecting our world today. So happy to speak a little bit more if people are interested later about volunteering and how that can kind of take you down different roads as well. But it's certainly been a really a challenging few years, and I do a bit of tutoring at uni as well down here at ANU, and I know that these, the issues that we're talking about today are reflective of how everyone's sort of feeling. And it's something that we've been grappling with at ACFID quite a bit as well. So obviously COVID has had quite a big impact on the NGO sector, and Juhi might be able to share her own experiences too. But for ACFID, we represent really large NGOs, World Vision, Plan, Oxfam, the ones you've probably heard of the most. But we also have most of our members who are really small, medium-sized NGOs, some of them just running on a few staff or volunteers. And so the impact of COVID has been quite significant in terms of impact on donations, but primarily around like how we work as NGOs as well, and what that's going to look like in the future. So I guess I thought I might just share some reflections about, I guess, some big conversations that are happening in the sector to help you get a sense of like what different organizations are thinking about, and also some of the different sort of job areas that you might want to keep an eye out for. I'd have to say that if you're interested in working in international aid and development, it can seem quite a closed sector sometimes, and quite difficult to figure out how to jump into it, or there's a lot of jargon used and different terms. So yeah, it's always good to try and unpack that, to check ourselves and think, oh, what are we talking about here? So one of the really big discussions that's sort of happening at the moment is thinking about the role that Australian NGOs play. So, and as you guys coming in or interested in perhaps working in this sector, it's really, I think, important for you to have a little think about it. But basically it's around, what does it mean to actually provide aid and development from a developing country, so to speak, and how can we actually shift the kind of power relationships that are at play in the sector? So a lot of discussion and thought and effort is being put into thinking about how we can actually shift funding and work and all sorts of things to a local context overseas. And how can we support people in the countries that they have that knowledge to do those jobs that often were Australians sort of flying in and flying out, so to speak. So there are some sort of changes happening across the sector, but it would be quite long-term changes as well. So that's not to say there aren't jobs in the sector. I don't want to put you off, but things are sort of changing as well in how we think about the types of roles that are there. So I think one of the things is that often, and I found this myself as well, I came into sort of studying this area thinking, oh, I really want to go and work overseas. I want to be on the ground. I want to be working in communities. In reality, most of the jobs are in Australia for Australian NGOs, and you can do incredible work and contribute enormously through the support that you can provide here in Australia. But in terms of working overseas, that's less positions and probably will be less in the future as well. So there are other opportunities and ways that you can obviously contribute overseas, but in terms of sort of the formal development sector and working in NGOs, the most of the roles are sort of supported here in Australia. But I think the really good thing from that is that you will already have skills and knowledge, experience that you have from other jobs that you can bring to the work that you might do here in Australia or wherever you're based as well. So it's really transferable skills. All those soft skills that people talk about all the time are super, super important. Cross-cultural experiences, you know, good communication skills. All of those things are really, really valuable in the sector. So if you don't feel like you have, you know, the technical expertise in particular areas, don't be put off by that. If you haven't specialized in a particular area, don't be put off by that as well. I guess there's always opportunities as well to look at those small and medium organizations and think, oh, how can I get some experience, get some breadth of experience? You know, you're more likely to be involved in all sorts of things in a smaller organization than perhaps in a larger one, where you might have a really more specific role. So keep your options open as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know how we're going for time, Danny, but I'm happy to kind of talk through anything else, or we can, go through it again in the breakout rooms, but I might leave it there for now.
Thank you, Emily. Looking forward to expanding on that conversation in the breakout room. I think there's a lot you've said there that I think students would find reassuring to know that, yes, the industry is shifting. Yes, how we consider aid and development might be different to perhaps how we as students perceive it to be. I know when I was, a younger undergraduate student, I thought it was more rose-colored glasses. It was, incredible work that was being done. And of course, there is incredible stuff being done. But I think oftentimes we romanticize or we glorify these positions as being like the be all and end all. And I think having a bit of a reality check that there are so many different working parts, it's not just one role that encompasses all these different things, is something that I've learned as well, working within an NGO space, but also just volunteering and interacting with a really wide variety of people. So thank you so much for that reflection. And last and certainly not least, we have Juhi. Would love to hear your thoughts on your first job and if you would be able to pick up that position again, and just a brief introduction to your role and also your thoughts on this topic. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Danny. Hi, everyone. My name's Juhi Sunraksa. I thought I'd just begin by reiterating my role and my agency. So I'm currently the Senior Technical Advisor for Gender and Inclusion in Emergencies at an NGO called Plan International Australia, which, as Emily mentioned, is a member of ACFID and is one of the medium-sized to large NGOs here in Australia. Works in 75 countries, focuses on child rights and specifically adolescent girls. So in this role, I've contributed to a number of projects centered on empowering and protecting adolescent girls, mostly living in conflict-affected settings. My role also includes providing practical and targeted technical advice across the project cycle. So from design all the way to evaluation, reiteration as well, on integrating gender sensitive. We would even go so far as to say gender transformative and inclusive program strategies. So my story, I feel just heaps of sympathy emanating from myself to everybody in this room, because I started my journey in development 15 years ago. I thought things were competitive then. I decided to pursue a career in social justice very early on as an adolescent. But at the time, do you know what? At the time, it wasn't as prolific or as accessible to get a degree specialized in international development as it is now. We're experiencing, I think you're all experiencing what we call credential creep in the sector. There just seems to be a new certification, a new training, and a new degree that you can get. Humanitarian action now has its own series of degrees. So while it's a good thing, there's also what's known as the over-professionalization of the sector. And it has resulted in really exacerbating what was already a very competitive sector to get a job in. And I know that there's so many amazing, passionate people like yourself who, like me, wanted a career that did good, didn't just make money. So I decided, instead of getting a degree in international development, I don't think I even considered it at the time. I didn't have someone advising me at that level and telling me that's an option. I developed my rhetoric, writing, and analytical skills through a degree in journalism. I thought the pen was mightier than the sword. I don't think I realized how many gatekeepers there were in journalism. So I very quickly decided, I don't feel very empowered here. I wonder if these skills are transferable. And so I ended up getting a degree, a master's in public policy. And I thought by educating myself and giving myself a solid understanding of the dilemmas posed by complex dynamics of interdependent global and national institutions and actors, that I might be able to change the world. I'm being very self-effacing here. I'm not serious when I say that, but I thought that I could do good in the world by getting a job in the State Department in the US. Eventually I landed on development, and my very first job, to answer the icebreaker question, is unfortunately not a really great story. I was a communications specialist at an organization for foundations conducting philanthropy in Southern California in the US. It taught me a great deal, and was my first foray via philanthropy into the world of aid. So I think I have some notes here in front of me that I thought I'd share, which was to maybe outline what the current landscape of the sector looks like. I think, as many of you will know from reading the news and having your ear to the ground and knowing colleagues and people in the sector is in flux. It's going through a period of intense self-reflection. International development agencies like PLAN are being buffeted by changing market conditions, declining public revenue, changing foreign aid infrastructure, obviously AusAid turning into DFAT, the same happened in the UK recently, and increasing complexity in the environment. The desire out of this self-effacing existential introspection has come about to flatten hierarchies within our INGO environments. PIA, I can confirm, recently went through a restructure to do just that. We're doing that to make sure that the inner reflects the outer, that our structure reflects our values, our vision, and our mandate. But of course, this side effect, or the externality of that, has been that we've moved resources and people abroad where they are in closer proximity to the programming, as you should. But of course, it also then means there are fewer roles in agencies like PLAN for Australians. All of this has only accelerated the move towards again, there's a lot of jargon for this: localization. Another one is disintermediation. That is to redress power imbalances between grassroots and frontline responders doing the actual hard work and their international counterparts, by ensuring greater control of financial resources and decision-making power to organizations with proximity and to affected communities and those who live and serve and are part of those affected communities. My advice is to be aware of the current aid delivery climate and be prepared to support agency visions, knowing this context and knowing their constraints that they're currently being buffered and triggered and responding to. Danny, I have so many notes here. I'm wondering how to, but I think I'll just end by this sort of vision.
Sure,
If that's okay. I'm going to skip 3 pages of notes. I over-prepared. I don't know what I was thinking.
There's so much to say on this topic, hey? It's impossible to keep it short, but hopefully in the breakout session with the attendees as well, if you're interested in hearing more of Juhi's incredibly rich and fascinating reflections on how the industry is changing, please join Juhi's breakout room. But thank you so much for that snippet. There's so much to think about and so many words like credential creep and over professionalization, like something that I hadn't even heard of. It makes so much sense. But thank you to you and all our speakers for such a in-depth introduction. But I thought we should probably move on to our actual kind of panel mediated session, which I'll be taking you all through some questions that were submitted by people who signed up for the event, but also is a reflection of a lot of conversations that I've been having with my peers that I mentioned. And yeah, to get started, if we can look at the next slide, there are a couple of major kind of topic areas that I thought we'd go through. I think the first dot point probably covers quite a lot of the conversation. I think a lot of us in the room here today have felt at some point or are experiencing, or perhaps will in the future, those real anxieties and real feelings of doubt and feeling lost and feeling like you're in a rut and you're feeling concerned, unmotivated, unsure if what you're doing is moving you towards the right direction or such. And it's definitely the case for me. It was a really tricky time coming back from exchange last year, cancelled 1-year program, and then having to reorient myself and repivot myself back into a home environment, which I wasn't used to because I had moved down to Sydney from Brisbane to do my undergraduate degree. And at the same time, going through emotional changes and also grappling with the fact that so many people were suffering. I think there's been a lot happening in our world. So of course, internally, going through the process of finding a job is exceptionally challenging. And another really big area that students are dying to hear about from industry people is that really awkward transition period from graduation and finding your first job. I think when I was in high school, I thought that you would automatically get a job after university. And that was obviously a very naive thought of mine. But I think we often, especially in this era of social media, we see the highlights reel, right? We see people landing a grad job straight after university. And in reality, that's not the case for every single person. So I wanted to make space for us to talk about how challenging and how tricky that period is. And also, conversely, like, you might have landed your dream job, but what if your dream job is actually really not what you expected? And what if the people that you're working with, you just don't click with? What if the work-life balance at the particular organization or agency you're at is just completely off? There could be so many different factors why you might decide not to continue with that supposed dream job. And of course, this also leads into other external anxieties, global uncertainties, climate change. There's so many things that are at play here. And then to kind of end on some really practical questions that audience members had submitted. So I really want to first direct this question to Saul, if that's okay. I just really would love to hear your personal reflections on how you felt navigating through the difficult period of finishing university and trying to find a job. And I should also mention that Joyce will also be our kind of fourth panelist here. And we will finish this panel discussion with a spotlight on some of our mental health services here at UNSW. But Saul, if you could briefly talk about the experience you went through in navigating some of those personal doubts and anxieties when it comes to finding a job.
Yeah, sure thing. Happy to talk to that point. And yeah, acknowledge, it's very tough, in your final year, navigating what to do, but then not only trying to find what your passion is, going through all the recruitment processes. But, it can just be a bit of a nightmare at times. Like, students kind of think, I get a degree, I'm going to get a job, but it's not necessarily, the reality. It can be, there's a lot of processes to go through, you often apply for places and get rejection after rejection. And you've kind of, you can get that feeling of self-doubt, like, does anyone kind of want to hire me? Am I actually ever going to get a job? But you kind of got to almost have a bit of resilience and, keep kind of pushing through the rejections, because there will, something eventually will come through. And I've seen that with a lot of my peers and friends, friends that I live with, also friends that I'm studying uni with, everyone kind of had their ideal dream job that they wanted to go off into, but didn't necessarily realize how competitive the job market can be. And I did see friends that were getting a bit disheartened by the rejections, and may not have necessarily landed the jobs that they'd initially wanted, but they did land something at the end. And I think in terms of acknowledging that, you're not always necessarily going to get exactly what you think is best, but you've got to go into that with a positive mindset and look at what you can kind of learn and grow from that role, and what are the new skills and experiences that you're going to get from that. Because it is only your first job. You've got, an entire career to jump around and find the thing you like. So my advice is, to students, definitely, don't be disheartened if you don't necessarily get the first job or your dream job. But actually, look out align yourself with companies, where you can grow, where you can learn, where there's opportunities for you to gain new skills, and then look about how you can then in the future transition that to something that you're more interested in or more passionate about. And I guess on the flip side as well, you see a lot of students who have this vision of the dream job that they want to get to, and when they get to it, they hate it, as you were saying, Denny. Throughout my time at UNSW, I was involved quite heavily with 180 Degrees Consulting, and they're like a student-led society that provides free consultancy advice to not-for-profit organisations. And typically the people that join 180 Degrees are all the people that want to go into the world of consulting. So I remember a lot of my peers at the time all had the ambitions of going to like the tier 1 and top tier strategy consulting firms, which are all really competitive to get into. And a lot of them did, get into it because, they were very, they had skills, they'd had all the experience, they'd done all the practice and interviews. And it was almost like everyone in that society or everyone around them wanted to go to that because it's what everyone thought was the best job and what everyone was going for and aiming for, but actually everyone kind of jumped on board. And I've caught up with friends recently who have gone into some of those jobs, and speaking to them, they're like, oh, I hate it. I work so hard and I, busted, I burnt myself out at uni just to get this job. And now I'm in a job where I'm working ridiculous hours and I'm not getting kind of the work-life balance I wanted. And it's just because of almost the prestige of getting there that they've found it's not necessarily for them. And I know people who have gone from there and then jumped into a startup or actually, transition to something that is actually more aligned to what they want to do. So I guess to summarize, on my point, don't be disheartened if you don't necessarily get the first job or your dream job. Look at the skills and experience you can get from it, and you've got a whole career to jump around and find your passion. And then on the flip side, what you initially think is going to be best may not be best for you. So it's all about, finding something that's right for you, and it will take time, but you've kind of got to push through with a bit of resilience on that aspect. So yeah, I hope, wish all you guys kind of luck in that area. It is tough. I've been there. I know the process, but you've kind of just got to keep pushing through and you will land something in the end.
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. That point on the need to keep pushing through, it can be really hard to deal with the rejections and the radio silence that I had just put in the chat. And it's definitely something that I went through as well. But you're so right, once you kind of go through those motions and catch up with some of those friends that you thought were doing just so incredible, you start to get a bit of a reality check that sometimes it's not completely as it seems. And also I had a conversation with a mate not too long ago when I was feeling all these anxieties, and he was saying, Danny, you're not choosing something that's going to last for your entire life. You're choosing your next step. And that next step is it might not necessarily be exactly what you envision, but it's that next step, right? But with this point, I think one thing that students find quite frustrating and really anxiety inducing is the chicken and egg situation, right? Where you need the experience to get a job that requires experience, but you need the job to get the experience. And it's just this never ending loop. And so, Emily, I did want to ask you a little bit about what it was like for you as an education student, getting that experience and how that fed into perhaps the way you were able to acquire like a first professional job, and what that process was like for you, because that chicken and egg situation, apologies about the sound in the background. I'm not sure if you can hear, but the rubbish truck decided to just grace us with its presence. But yes, if you can just reflect a little bit on what that chicken and egg situation was like for you, because it's definitely a frustration that lots of people have. And I guess touching base on that value of volunteering and what that has allowed you to achieve and go on to do as of now.
Yeah, I guess starting in education, you're a bit spoiled, right? Because you get trained. It's one of those few professions where you get trained to be a teacher and you go on and you can be a teacher. So it's actually a completely different kettle of fish to what it's like to then transition into this sector, and just starting out as well. And it's really, really hard. So I guess volunteering is also a kind of double-edged sword, right? So, there's people who can't volunteer. They don't have the means to support them, so they need to have a paid job to be able to do that. And in many ways, it's still a really sort of unfair practice, I think, that happens a lot in the sector. But in saying that, there are some really, really great opportunities for you to I guess, even sort of try out the sector, and like you're saying, like to see what kinds of roles you might like to do as well. So again, you know, there's informal ways. So smaller organizations are often looking for volunteers to help out on particular, like even if it's admin, like even if you take a sort of admin office role, you're going to see what happens across the whole organization. You're going to get a really good sense of, oh, that's what that means, or oh, that's an interesting skill, or hey, I actually know heaps more about these people, about how to manage this system or how to do communications or all sorts of things. So it's a good way as well to get a sense of the skills that you can actually bring. And then there's obviously some more formal kind of processes around volunteering, like the Australian Volunteering Program, that you can take a look at. And they're really great for giving you overseas experience, and they're sort of doing remote volunteering now as well with COVID. And again, it's a way for you to, I guess, apply some of the skills that you might have. And I would encourage you to, I mean, everyone sort of feels like an imposter a lot of the time. So if you feel like you're not quite ready for that job, or it's not quite, you know, oh, I'm not going to be able to do all of it, that's okay. Like, still go for it. And you can learn as you go, and employers know that, you know, you might not tick all of the criteria all of the time. So I'd say if you see a job or an opportunity, even if it's volunteering, to just have a go. But the other thing is as well, is the thing that really helped me was building up connections and networks. So I say this as someone who really doesn't like networking. As an introvert, it's one of my least favorite things to do. However, when you find the right kind of opportunities, and there are some networks, I can share them in the chat in a minute, that are out there in the sector that can just give you that kind of someone who's got a bit more experience than you, who might already be working in the sector, who you can bounce ideas off. They can kind of help teach you some of the jargon, that kind of thing. So I think knowing people and chatting to people, coming to things like this where you can, you know, get email addresses after and follow up if you need to, that's just all really helpful. And it'll just step by step help kind of guide you on, oh, that's, you know, sometimes it's hard to know what opportunities are even out there. So yeah, it's a tricky one, but I'd say persevere and get to know as much as you can about the different types of organizations and where you want to work and stuff. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. That point about networking, I think a lot of people feel the same. It can be really daunting to put yourself out there and to send a cold call to someone on LinkedIn. But if I quickly just share some of my personal experience with that, I typically have more of an outgoing personality, but still for me to, you know, send a message to somebody that I didn't know, I found that quite like uncomfortable and a bit daunting, but I just kind of bit the bullet and did it and contacted someone, I guess, like Saul, who would be an alumni of mine, and just asked for a very quick chat. And the you know, worst that can happen, is someone says no, right? And I wasn't asking for anything. I wasn't saying, oh, can you give me a job? That wasn't why I was approaching this person. I just kind of said, I would love to talk about what you are doing and what you're working on right now. And if you give the opportunity for someone to talk about themselves for half an hour, most people are going to say yes. Like it's, you can't really lose in that situation. And what that provided me, that conversation put an organization on the radar for me. And it didn't necessarily eventuate in something immediately, but after recognizing this particular NGO, I was able to get a volunteer position, and it's really amazingly led to a part-time gig for me at the moment, as still an undergraduate student. And of course, there were a lot of challenging things that came beforehand, but it's an example of how it can be exceptionally valuable. But to kind of pivot into the next question I had for you, Juhi, actually, was for someone who is more assured of what kind of industry they would like to go into, which was actually the case for me too, although it took a bit of time to kind of flesh out and understand. What would you say are some attractive skills and qualities that a lot of employers or workplaces really value, not just in the NGO space, but beyond, as just in collaborative work. Because I think one of the main things in social sciences is that combination of really critical thinking and being able to consider different perspectives, but also being able to translate that information to other people and kind of bounce off and have conversations with others to do meaningful teamwork. So what would you say makes a really attractive candidate in the NGO space, and what kind of advice would you provide for a student who, you know, knows what they want to go in, but might not be sure how to sell themselves perhaps?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I've been asked this many times before by people looking to enter or wondering, what do they showcase in an interview? What aspects of themselves? Because I'll tell you what, technical knowledge is not something that you're going to come in having, no matter how much you've studied, because unfortunately, everything I've learned about my specialty area, I've learned by observing, and I've learned it through osmosis, and I've learned it by asking the right questions of the right people, of getting past my social anxieties, of walking up to people who I didn't know very well and revealing how little I actually knew, just so I could learn, and really, you know, observing it. I know I'm jumping in meetings, but also observe how people comment, whether observe their emails, observe their communication style, observe their particular critical thinking style, and determine for yourself I think I was able to convey in an interview, to get my foot wedged through the door and then to push it ajar once I was in an entry-level position. That includes a cross-cultural awareness, yes. It includes altruism and empathy, showing that I have the right justifications or the sort of the right aspirations for why I want to be in the job. Of humility, a bit of understanding that no matter how many degrees you've done and how many years of study, you have to come in saying, look, I don't know what the job's like, but I'm willing to learn. A high degree of dedication, self-motivation. Look, you're working in a very fast-paced, deadline-oriented, tight time frame environment. Yes, things have slowed down with COVID-19, but ultimately, I have never worked for an INGO or any institution in this sector that hasn't, because of the nature of the job, you know, you're either working towards a humanitarian crisis and an appeal that has a deadline and then has to be deployed and used within a certain amount of time, or you're working you're ultimately working with needs that are immediate. You have to be able to show that you require very little supervision, and it's a vocation. But it requires you to be a little bit of an anthropologist, a psychologist, maybe a water and sanitation expert, a gender equality expert. I mean, it's kind of absurd, the amount of expectations we put on somebody, you know? And I say that with humility, like nobody actually achieves those things, but you are meant to be very multidimensional on a technical and level, as well as a level of being a holistic, well-rounded person that's able to, as you said already, you listed all of them, Danny, communicate well, have critical thinking skills. And it's kind of a lot to ask of a person. So it's not that anyone will expect you to do all those things, but unfortunately, you have to be able to show some of those key points in the interview, even in your application, in order for someone to seriously consider your application. And that really it really is unfortunate. I agree. I do very, very much second everything Emily said. I myself, in wanting to move away from being a generalist to something more of a specialist around program quality and a thematic expert, I went to networking events. You know, I went to drinks that were advertised as a place for professionals and students and up and coming entry-level careerists to speak to each other informally. I, you know, eventually, with my heart being out of my chest, got the courage to lift this hand up and ask questions at Q&As and at webinars and lectures. And I got myself noticed, and maybe I, you know, instilled a little bit of confidence in a colleague who went, oh, you know what, I'll give her that piece of work, or I'll add her onto this project. That's fine. I've seen this happen with some really dedicated, committed individuals within agencies, where they will do anything they can, and it's so rewarding to get a good secondment. You know, you might think to yourself, look, I don't want to work in comms. I don't want to work in marketing or fundraising or donor contacts, or I don't want to do programming. I don't want to do gender equality. You know, you have a very specific idea of what you want to do in development, but I think it's a really good idea to broaden and be receptive to the fact that you can be useful anywhere in the agency, and once you find that mentor, that guide, or that receptive individual who has some level of influence in the agency, they will notice that aptitude, and they will second you from that role that you saw as being building the scaffolding of your skills, and they will give you more and more responsibility. At least that is how it's worked for me, but it's also how it's worked for so many people around me, which is why it does take 10 to 15 years to really find your footing in this. But and I would definitely say to profited by all of these call, there is so much to be done by individuals are either not able if you're you would say the headquarters office, my goodness, we don't say that anymore, but
Jenny, I think we might have lost Judy there.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thanks for that, Saul. Juhi, I think we may be losing you with your internet, but I guess the last part of that, just talking about how there's so many options, and that notion of really putting yourself out there can have incredible return, and it's worked for a lot of Juhi's colleagues, and acknowledging that it can be really challenging. If Juhi comes back on, I might ask this question, but I might invite Joyce to speak on this a little bit, because it's a question that we had submitted from the audience, and I think it really links a lot of what Saul was talking about, what Juhi mentioned, but also what Emily brought up as well. But it's this idea that you need to keep acquiring more and more qualifications, and that's the antidote to get a job. Now, I don't want to sound that, if that is the trajectory that you've taken and you are adding more qualifications, I do not want to sound dismissive of how valuable extra qualifications can be. But this particular student said, do employers prefer candidates that have a thesis up their sleeve? Now, I thought the wording of that question was super interesting. Do employers prefer? It makes it sound like there is a yes or no answer to the question, but in reality, like lots of things, it's not a yes or no question. And what I've personally reflected on is at times I've felt super incompetent, and I was like, do I need to know how to code? Surely coding will be the way that I can expand on my credentials and acquire a job in a tech space. But the thing is, it's not necessarily one or the other, right? It's about how you utilize that qualification and how that qualification enables you to shape your narrative or how you present yourselves to different employers. So Joyce, if you could quickly talk on it for 1 or 2 minutes, that would be great. And then we'll move on to introducing some mental health. I should probably say spotlighting on some mental health services, and then we'll move into our breakout rooms. Take it away, Joyce.
Okay, thanks, Danny. I might have to take a bit more than 1 minute because it's a big question.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be a devil's advocate, because a few years ago, I went to a session that's run by a well-known critical race theorist called Jerry Kahn, who works at the University of California, or UCLA. And he is the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Equity and Diversity. And what he was arguing for is, why should we bother to keep acquiring qualifications, knowledge, and experience as what he calls the fungible middle? Okay, you graduated top of your high school. Congratulations. You get there and you realize, oh, somebody else came from a high school with higher ranking than your high school. Okay, so you get shoved to the middle. You graduated top of your class in your third year, top of honors and so on. Oh, guess what? Somebody's got a Fulbright, whatever, something. Okay, so again, you get shuffled back to the fungible middle and so on and so forth. And I think what Jerry Kahn was saying is that learning and acquiring experiences is a constant journey. And that no matter how good you think you are always going to be in the fungible middle, in the sense that there is always going to be somebody better than you, more qualified, and that, somebody that you can always learn from. And so that's one perspective. The other perspective is, I think it's really important to be aware of, we are in this age of global uncertainties and anxieties. And what I often hear from students is, will this degree get me a job? And because I used to work in UN Women for a number of years, a lot of the questions I hear is, Joyce, how do I work in the UN? Will this degree get me a job in the UN? But the thing is, you might not like working in the United Nations. So that's one thing, and I think that's already been touched on by Sol, Emily, and Juhi. But the second thing is that it takes a number of factors to land you to where you want to be, and also where I had wanted to be. For me to get into that UN job, it took me 7 years. So 7 years that included university volunteer work, so serving on women's NGOs committee, being the broad members of women's NGOs, working in leadership capacities in those spaces, then working in AusAid/DFAT, and also working in various policy areas and picking up various things before I was able to land a volunteer position, the Australian Youth Ambassadors, and then working in a more regular capacity with UN Women. So in that sense, no, your degree will not necessarily get you a job, but it's about the network that you build, as Juhi and Emily talked about. It's about what Sol was saying about having a plan B in terms of, okay, so you thought you got into a dream job, but that might not be your dream job. How do you pivot from that? So in that sense, having a thesis or degree is, yes, it's good. It's incredibly useful. It might put you a step above that fungible middle, but it's also about your network, your overall experiences, because ultimately employers are going to be looking at someone who is well-rounded, who has interests and passion beyond what you have studied.
Amazing, Joyce. There's some great reflections to be had about what you've just spoken on. I think for me personally, that point about learning is constant, and that as much as extra qualifications are super valuable, and it's something admittedly I would love to pursue one day too, I think it's important to note that it's not just like a one size fits all or immediate reward kind of situation where X degree lands Y job. Like, it just doesn't work like that anymore. And I think what helped me personally navigate through a really tumultuous time over the last 15 months or so is reorienting my brain to say it's not just about whether I get this or not, but what is each stage teaching me? And I know it's a cliche thing to say, like, oh, you gotta lose some to win some, this rejection was rock bottom and now it's going to help me spring into the next stage of my life. It's more so acknowledging that there isn't one formula or way to navigate through these difficult times, but to acknowledge that that's part of the process. And even if you're not immediately aware of that happening to everybody else, everybody's going through that process. And even if you change a career at 40 years old, given that you have, fingers crossed, good health and you live another 35, 40 years, that still leaves an incredible amount of time for you to shift into a different space or to move around.
Disclosure, I had a career change at the age of 28, and then so going to PhD from working in the UN, and then another career change at the age of 35 after I graduated and got my PhD. So hopefully, I know that in this age of social media, there's a lot of pressure to do what your peer is doing, or do what your family expects you to do. In my generation, in my own cultural background, it's the, my if I say I want to follow my star, my parents in their generation would be saying, well, you follow that star, you go out the door and you don't come back, right? And thankfully these days, people have a lot more choices, and it should be that way. But I think it's also important not to feel as though you have to follow other people's stars, that you should always follow your own.
Yeah, it can be challenging to even come to terms with developing your own sense of where is my star leading me to, but I think that's all part of the process. And yeah, man, I could talk about this topic for so long, but I really think we should move into our breakout rooms now. So if we can please change the slide. We might actually come back to the spotlight on the mental health services at the end of the session, but for the next 15 minutes, we will go a little bit over time, it seems, but for the next 10-15 minutes, I will make an announcement when we can come back. But there are 3 rooms open for all of you guys in the call to join. So if you have a look at the slide right now, room 1 will have Saul and Joyce focusing on pivoting through the uncertain job market and kind of finding your feet through acquiring a job. Room 1, oh, why did I put room 1 twice? That is a mistake on my part. Room 2, apologies, will be a pathway overview of the development and social sciences industry as covered by Emily. I actually first came across Emily from listening to her doing an incredible presentation at the Research for Development Institute's conference on this exact topic. And so if you're interested in having a look at what different options are there that make up the development industry, pop into room 2 with Emily, and room 3 with Juhi will be a rich conversation on the changing nature of the aid and development industry, how we can reset and think about what meaningful work really means. So the activity that I would really love everyone to keep in mind as you listen to the speakers present is to work with one another, talk to each other, turn your mics on, have a fun conversation, and come up with a punchline message or a key takeaway that you as a student might gain from the session. Work with the relevant speaker in your room, and yeah, have fun, talk openly. This is meant to be an open discussion, and so I'm sure the speakers would love to hear your inputs and vice versa. So if everyone can please choose a room to pop into, I think we should go until, let's give it 10 minutes. So if we can reconvene at 6:57, I know it's a bit of an odd one, but I will call everyone back. So please go and join in a room that you're interested in, and we'll see you at 6:57.
Danny, how do I go to my room?
So if you click breakout rooms down the bottom.
I did, yeah.
Can you
join? Okay.
Yeah, down the bottom it says join. Yep, so please, everyone in the group as well, please go and join a room of your choosing. If you choose breakout room down below, and yeah, you can scroll down to the bottom and choose which room you would like to join. Don't have the breakout room tab. That's very strange.
Yeah, me too.
Oh no, that's so strange. Okay.
I guess what we'll do is, if you can change your names to just room 1
2 or 3,
Oh,
then
yes.
I can assign everyone quickly.
Amazing. Yeah, if everyone can just change their name and put R1, R2, or R3 just before their first name, we'll allocate you guys. Sorry about that.
Was R2. Yep. Right. I guess everyone's except R3. Here we go. That's it. It's only you and me now. Okay. Sorry, you're on mute. Would you like to join the room so then I can?
Sorry, I think I can join as I please because I'm set up as a host.
Co-host. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'll stop the recording.
Perfect.
And once we come back, are we just doing the key takeaways and then we finish off with the mental health stuff?
Yes, we'll do the key takeaways. Hopefully we'll go over 10 minutes. We'll do key takeaways, then we'll go back to talk about the mental health services and then finish off.
Cool, great.
Yeah.
I'll
Thank
see
you very much.
Bye.
Not as much time as we'd thought, but it always tends to be the case with online events, hey?
Yeah, all good.
All right, we can wait for the others. But it was so good to see that PowerPoint again, Emily.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We sort of rushed through it. I'm not sure it was as helpful maybe, but yeah, it's just so hard to get a sense of the whole thing. So
exactly.
Yeah.
I might follow up with you afterwards to maybe get those slides off you and disseminate it. I'm sure students would really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Do we have everyone back? I think we may, while we're waiting on the last. No, okay, everyone's trickling through. All right, welcome back, everyone. So we'll go through each of the rooms, and if you can do a quick, let's say like a 60-second pitch of one of the key takeaways that you took away from the session, that would be wonderful. So starting with room 1, do we have a rep?
Okay, team. I think Connor, you were studiously taking notes and you had some really wonderful thoughts to share.
Yes, thanks, Joyce. I was taking notes, and just a couple of the lessons. I think a couple of the lessons I really picked up from that breakout room was it's important just to sort of like take the first, like it's good to take the first opportunity, and even if it's not what you really want to do straight up, and at the same time just learn as much as you can and learn as many people as you can, and just take advantage of the great number of opportunities and different projects that you might come across, because it's you never know where that can go.
Amazing. Thanks, Connor. That was awesome. Very, very quick, and you nailed it. Room 2, did we have someone from Emily's group to speak on?
Hey, Danny.
Oh.
I think it'll be shorter than 60 seconds. I think that sort of the biggest takeaway was just try everything and eventually something will stick. Like, you don't have to love everything. There'll be skills in everything you do. So yeah. So
great. 15 seconds, hit the nail in the nail in the coffin, nail in the nail. Maybe.
I get ya.
But awesome. Thank you to Emily and the group. And last but not least, we have room 3. Is there a representative from Juhi's room?
We didn't select one, but I'll go ahead.
Go, Alicia.
There was a lot to take away and not enough time, but I think what stuck with me was that even though we're studying global development, community development is equally rewarding and a great platform to, I guess, initiate change. And that's something we should also look into.
Amazing. Thank you for that summary. I'm sure there are so many more thoughts that are to be articulated, but we can have a see how we can expand on this conversation with these great panelists. But thank you everyone for sharing those key takeaways, and I hope it was a useful session just to interact more one-on-one with the panelists. Joyce, if you can quickly speak on the earlier slides of the mental health services, and then we will try and wrap up.
So, look, in this session, we talked about career anxieties and insights on, people's experiences, navigating with it, and also living with the anxieties, recognizing that it's normal to have these anxieties. And so in that sense, UNSW, and for those who are joining in from other universities, please do look into your university's resources and also services which are available in terms of UNSW's mental health services. There is a whole lot of support out there. I think, thank you, Madhav, who just shared the links as well in the chat. In terms of, so please do look at those resources and don't feel stigmatized. Don't feel that it's embarrassing to talk about this or get help, because everybody at some point in their lifetime will experience these concerns and worries. And so let's just, look after ourselves, look after each other by firstly, seeking help and having these conversations and identifying what's troubling you, and also ways of getting forward, and also getting support as well along the way. I think, is there a next slide on the, yep, perfect. So here we have a whole list of different services ranging from Mental Health Connect, so for both domestic and international students. Broadly, we also have student support, which looks at anything from, say, your financial situation to your accommodation, or for, your visa situation, to, oh yes, thank you, Danny. Yes, you can also take a screenshot, but for those who are undergraduate studies, you should have also this in your course Moodle page. When you log into your course Moodle, this will be on your left. Yes, that's my left. It's my left-hand side. That all those services will be on your left-hand side. So look for this yellow block, reporting sexual assault and harassment. So, the university has a zero tolerance policy around sexual assault and harassment and bullying as well. Educational adjustment in terms of, looking at equitable learning services to accommodate, to look at how to make your learning experiences equitable, particularly if you have ongoing health, family, or other ongoing situations. Okay. Academic and study skills, and these are one-on-one support, online or in person. Currently online. Hopefully next year will be in person, in terms of supporting you in terms of your learning skills and needs. Special consideration. Everybody, no matter which university you're in, you should know this. Okay, you should know how to do this, because this is called extension. Okay, and this is really about, if you have unforeseen circumstances, which means you cannot, hand in your essay in time. Special consideration is the portal where you apply for extension. Okay, and they are very considerate. They look at, the circumstances, and if you don't have the relevant documentation, if you can provide a reason as to why you can't produce the documentation, and they will take that on a one-on-one case basis. So there's so many services and support. These are sort of barely scratching the surfaces, but I do strongly recommend people to please don't ever feel bad about reaching out to these services. I mean, I wish when I was an undergraduate or even postgraduate, those type of services were available to me. So please never feel shy to reach out for help, because there is always somebody there on the other end,
Thanks, Joy.
ready to help.
Such an important reminder, I think. And as this topic was more specific to how our anxieties can really be flared up when it comes to navigating our career, I think that reminder is more important than ever, right? And as a lot of Australians come in and out of lockdown and go through the world around us continually changing, I think dealing with our own internal ups and downs and internal changes should be recognized as a natural process, right? And it's so important to consider. So just to finish off today's session, if we can have a look at the next slide. And thank you so much to Juhi. I think I just missed her right there when I think she had to head off. But we would really love to have your say when it comes to this event. I know it was actually a smaller cohort than we had initially envisioned, but always the case with online events, it can be a real challenge to navigate different components. But I think from just briefly listening into some of the breakout rooms and some of the conversations that were occurring, it's been a wonderful conversation. So if you can please take note of the link that I think Madhav has just sent to the chat, and also you can utilize the QR code. Please have your say on what you felt about this event. And also, if we move on to the next slide, I just really wanted to finish off by acknowledging the amount of effort and different perspectives that actually were fed into creating this event. It's a 1 hour and a half online event, but there are so many more hours of communicating with guests, communicating with speakers, and all a manner of different people that have contributed to putting together this event. And I feel personally as though that there is so much else to discuss and so much more to expand on. So I really don't want to leave this just at that. I think I have a lot of different ideas.
There could be a sequel.
Yeah, there could be a sequel. I'm even thinking a potential, podcast episode. I've got some ideas flowing. So to Saul and Emily and Juhi, of course, I will be in contact and perhaps producing a part 2 of this conversation, because I still have so many more questions that I really wanted to ask. But there are lots of people to thank. And so thank you to everyone who I was able to have a conversation with personally in feeding this event. Thanks to, of course, the speakers for giving up your time and sharing some of your knowledge and your insights. To Madhav behind the scene, absolute whiz in making sure all the tech is smooth sailing, and of course to Joyce for being my partner in crime for this event. But I guess we can end here.
But firstly though, I want to thank the student participants, everyone who attended the focus groups. Thank you so much, Jessie, for the amazing artwork. And also, lastly but not least, to Danny, who just completely amazing, took this idea, ran with it, and all the students, just thank you, Danny. I think I said earlier, you and other students tonight exemplify what students of social sciences should be: curious, passionate, and dedicated. So thank you,
Joyce. That's very, very kind of you to say. Really appreciate that. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Saul. Appreciate it.
Everyone.
Thank you, Saul.
Bye.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.